Brought to you by Penguin.
The Widow's Shillings by Libby Ashworth. Read by Katy Sobey. For Ralph, who always does his best to help. Summer, 1852. Chapter 1. Kitty Cavanagh pushed her barrow into the back alley behind the houses on King Street. It was very early in the morning, and she and two of her children, Maria and Peter, were amongst the few people who were up and about. As they searched for any items of value, the sun crested the top of the tall buildings with the promise of a hot summer's day to come. It brought welcome relief after days of incessant rain when their clothing had been soaked every morning and barely dry by bedtime. Kitty poked her stick into a pile of rubbish that had accumulated in the gutter that ran down the edge of the cobbles, and was pleased to feel something solid. Wondering if it might be bones that she could weigh in at the rag warehouse for cash, she eased the tangle of weeds and sodden paper aside to take a better look. Seeing what looked like a small Hessian sack, she bent to retrieve it. The sack was much heavier than she expected when she lifted it, dripping from the ground. She held it at arm's length to put it in the barrow to inspect it more closely. As she laid it down, she heard what sounded like coins chinking together, and eagerly pulled off her gloves to pick at the tight knots in the string that held it closed. Kitty gave a sharp intake of breath as she caught sight of the money. She glanced up to check that no one was watching her, then cautiously withdrew one of the coins from the bag and stared at it as it lay on the palm of her hand. It had a picture of the young queen stamped on it, bareheaded with her hair curling down at the back as if it was coming unpinned. Some Latin words were stamped around the edge, but Kitty had no idea what they meant. She turned the coin over. On the back, surrounded by a wreath of leaves and the queen's crown, there were two large words. Kitty could read these. They said, 1 shilling, and the numbers below were the year the coin had been minted, 1850. 2 years ago, although the coin looked shiny and new, as if it had just been made. She opened the bag a little wider and began to count the shillings. There were maybe a couple of dozen or more. A lot of money, all seemingly lost in a back alley. Someone must have dropped the bag, though who would be in the backs behind King Street with so much money? Possibly one of the businessmen who lived here. She looked up at the row of tall terraced houses and considered whether to try to return it. She could begin with the Andertons. They knew her and wouldn't accuse her of stealing, but she wasn't sure if they would be out of bed at this time, and she didn't want to disturb them if they were still asleep. She made her way towards their back door to see if there was anyone in the basement kitchen. Even if Mr. and Mrs. Anderton were still abed, their maid, Dorothy, might be up and kindling the fire ready to make breakfast. But when she reached the top of the steps, Kitty could see no movement from inside the house, and she was reluctant to go and knock at such an early hour. Perhaps she should call back later to ask if they knew anyone who had lost some money. In the meantime, Kitty tucked the bag of coins underneath the pile of rags she'd found to take down to Mr. Reynolds at the Rag and Bone warehouse. It would be safe enough there until she could return it to its rightful owner. Calling quietly to the children, who were at the far end of the alley, to follow her, she continued on her rounds. They gathered what they could here and there as they scoured the streets and ginnels for cast-off clothing, unwanted pans, even lengths of twine and lost nails from horses' shoes. It was all of some value, and every farthing they could earn was important. "I think it's time to finish," she told the children, as doors began to open. Maids...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?